It's my pleasure to introduce David Bakula, who's going to tell us the profile of the Canadian music fan. Then Russ is going to join us. Then we're going to try and have a short discussion with you to ask questions about all the things they're telling you that you really didn't know. Okay? Thanks.
Thanks.
Boy, that was so articulate.
Thank you, Ted. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for making the time. Welcome to Canadian Music Week. And, I think Russ and I are going to come up with a lot of things today that are going to be really interesting, and I hope we have some great dialogue and some great questions. So with that being said, I'm going to launch right into it, I think. Who is the Canadian music fan? It's that guy right there. It's I think I saw him last night. This thing is a little, I'm having a hard time here. Let's take a look at the Canadian music landscape, for starters. And what we are looking at here today is going to be a lot of data from our Music 360 survey in Canada, which is, right now, it is like that. When you go to the grocery store and you see that loaf of bread that doesn't expire for about 3 weeks, that's how fresh this thing is. It was literally in the field 2 weeks ago. So we have the most updated and up to the almost minute Canadian consumer data that anybody's going to have. We're actually showing it here for the first time. So you're seeing it almost as quickly as I have seen it. And what does it tell us? It tells us we love music. We love music. We're spending more time with it in more ways. We're listening to it for just enjoyment, the pure enjoyment of it. We're working out with it. We're falling asleep on our computers to it. Studying, reading, doing all of these different things. This thing is really tough. The time spent listening to music, this is matching up our 2013 survey to our 2015 survey. And as you can see, the time spent with music is increasing dramatically. The number of hours in a week spent listening to music for both general population on the left and teens on the right is really increasing pretty dramatically. Up 20% for all music listeners, but up 40% for teens. So there's more time being spent with music. And what are they doing? What kind of things are we doing while we're listening to music? Here's another place where you can really see the contrast between the general population and the teen consumer. That really important, very engaged, musically involved teen consumer is spending a lot more time listening to music while they're doing other things, being on the internet, studying, working out, going shopping, running errands, all of these different types of things. So the percentage of the time spent by teens listening to music and doing other things is a little bit different than it is for total population who are listening to it while they're at work, while they're in the car, they're commuting, they're doing things like that. So where are we listening? How are we doing our listening? You saw there's a big chunk of people that are listening to music in their cars, and a lot of time is being spent in the car. Well, you take that car and you take those different types of consumers. You take general population, you take teens, you take millennials. The teens are the 13 to 17s, the millennials are the 18 to 34s. And the way that they're listening to music in the cars is very different than the way that people as old as me are listening to music in the car. Where with the general population, AM, FM radio, 80% of the people in the cars are saying, yes, I'm listening to AM, FM radio in the car. But when you take that out down to the teens level and to the millennials level, you see that there's a lot more listening going on that is external of the device that is in the car. They're bringing their device with them. They're either putting in their headphones and saying, you know what, Dad's listening to that crappy classic rock station again. I want to listen to hip-hop or EDM or something like that, and we'll get to genres in a second. But that consumer is listening to far more, the music fan is listening to far more music on their own devices. It's either devices that they have an earbud or some kind of internal speaker, or they've got something that's actually playing for everybody in the car, but it's an external device. Share of time, yeah, AM, FM radio is still the biggest share of time, especially for the general population. 30% of our time is being spent with AM, FM radio. But again, you take that down to the teens, you take that down to that engaged level where the teen is going in and saying, you know what, I don't want to listen to just the radio. I don't want to listen to just programmed. I want to go in and listen to what I want to and program it myself. I want to listen to streaming. We're going to talk about how important streaming is throughout this presentation. And as you can see, for the general population, 23% of time being spent with streaming, but for teens, it's 34% of their time is being spent with streaming. So it's definitely one of the it is the fastest growing piece, and it's one of the biggest pieces of listening time. The digital, their own digital library is obviously the biggest piece of that there. I want to listen to everything that I own digitally, and I'm going to listen to it digitally. Technology, we talk about digital, we talk about how technology is really changing the way that we listen to music and changing the way that we discover music as well. Smartphones and tablets, huge increases in people listening to music on smartphones and tablets and being able to access things like apps and discovery tools and different types of information. A lot of listening and a lot of discovery going on tablets and smartphones. The big growth there for tablets and smartphones, 34% on smartphones in 2013, up to 42%, and then 19% on tablets, up to 29% now. So two of the biggest platforms that people are listening to music on. You can see the computer is still the main driver of listening, but that's coming down a little bit. And you can see the other ones that are dropping. The home stereo system dropping pretty substantially. People don't even have home stereo systems anymore, and when they do, they look a lot different than they used to in the past. The iPod, oh, RIP the iPod. I love that thing, and it's got all my music on it, and Apple's not making it anymore. But so some of those things, you know, and there's a lot of trend towards wearables now. This is something that in 2013, wearables weren't really a big topic of conversation, but now obviously in 2015, wearables are becoming a bigger and bigger piece of that, and you can see those numbers on the end are finally starting to come in and to show some significant numbers at the end. Discovering music. How do we discover music? You know, music consumers in general are still relying on radio for their discovery. 67% of the total population is using AM/FM terrestrial radio as a form of discovery, and it's still the biggest piece. But again, breaking that down to teens and millennials, you can see that those numbers are a little bit lower for radio and a little bit higher, well, significantly higher really, for things like online sites, any of the digital discovery tools. There is a lot of discovery going on from friends. Obviously, friends and relatives is a really big piece of that, but that's even a pretty social thing. That's not me going, hey, hey Tommy, you know what? I just went and listened to that new record, and you should really go out and buy it. It's me putting it on my Twitter. It's me putting it on my Facebook page. It's me saying, hey, all of my friends and people that have agreed to say they're my friend online, here's the music I'm listening to, and you should check this out, and you're going to love it. So that's kind of the social aspect of that. It's the digitally driven side of it. The discovery part of it is really much more digitally driven for the millennials and teens than it is for anybody else. Streaming music, it's growing like crazy, and it's showing no signs of letting up, and we're really seeing some pretty dramatic numbers, both from the survey that we did here just a couple weeks back, but also from some of the census level data that we're getting from our streaming partners and tracking there. We're going to go through some of those. Right now, streaming, 71% of the population is streaming right now versus 63% back in 2013. So we're seeing growth there for the total population. YouTube and Vevo, still by far the biggest form of streaming on there. The video streaming piece of it, very, very popular. And you can see kind of where everybody falls in below that. You've got your songs of Spotify, Google Play, TuneIn Radio, Shazam, Grooveshark. You know, the Grooveshark thing will be very interesting and something that we're working on now is, what happens now that Grooveshark is shut down? What happens? Where do those people go? What were they doing before, and what are they doing now? Well, we're going to be taking a look at that in the coming months to see just how the Grooveshark shutdown is kind of affecting the whole streaming business. We're also buying slightly more music this year, which is great news. I think everybody has looked at some of the numbers and saw, the streaming growth and maybe some softness in some of the sales metrics. But what's actually happening here is that we're seeing an uptick in sales this year. We look at sales in kind of two different ways. One, as a sale of albums, overall albums, physical albums, digital albums, you can see there in the middle. But the real piece, the whole buying side of the business over on the left-hand side is the total music sales with TEA. TEA is track equivalent albums. Every time 10 tracks sell, it's about the same equivalency as one album. So it enables us to take all those track sales and all those album sales and kind of jam them together and say, here's the one metric for the industry and how we're going to measure it year over year. Well, as you can see, thankfully, up 0.1%. So far through the end of April this year, we're up 0.1% versus where we were last year. Albums are actually up 2.3%. I know a lot of people sit in rooms like this and go, who still buys albums? Well, a lot of people still buy albums, and 2.3% more of them are buying albums this year than they were last year. The physical piece of it down a little bit, 5% down. The digital albums are actually up 12% year over year. So where digital albums were taking a little bit of a backseat last year and starting to decline a little bit, we've seen a real nice rebound this year so far in digital albums. The track side of the business still under a little bit of pressure, down 5% year over year. Sales are just part of the picture, though. You can't look at just sales and say this is the health of the industry. You have to look at streaming as well. In July of last year, we launched our streaming tracking service. And what we're seeing here is that not only is streaming becoming a bigger and bigger part of the business, it's actually the biggest part of the business so far this year. The same way that we do track equivalent albums, we do stream equivalent albums that tends to approximate the revenue coming in from streaming. And if you use a ratio of 10 to 1 on tracks and 1,500 to 1 on streams, streaming is actually the biggest single share of album equivalents or of simulated revenue, if you will, in the industry. 27% coming from physical albums, 24% from digital albums, 21% coming from track, and 27.5% coming from streaming. So not only is streaming a fairly rapidly growing, to say the least, format, it's already become the biggest format out there. If we look at the streaming share of the business, what I've done here is we've been tracking streaming since the middle of last year. So this is about 40 weeks worth of data. And I thought, how convenient, 40 divided by 4. I'm going to do 4-week increments and have 10 nice slices of time here. You look at the middle of last year, around July, August, September of last year, and this is what percentage of the business was coming from each of the formats. You can see at the bottom is physical albums, the purple is digital albums, the orange is digital tracks, and the blue is streaming. And last year, around the middle of the year, streaming was running about 19, 20, 21% of the business. Obviously, when we get into the holidays, that physical side of the business always increases every single year. People love to go buy gifts for the holidays, and that physical CD makes the perfect gift, of course. So that jumps up at the end of the year while everything else kind of compresses. But then we get into January, and the digital side of the business really takes off. Usually that is happening in digital buying. Usually that is something where, oh, my friend gave me an iTunes gift card for Christmas, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to load it up with a whole bunch of songs that I didn't buy last year. It's usually that way where people are doing that. But what we saw this year is that big digital surge that we typically get at the beginning of the year didn't quite happen the way that we had seen in the past. The digital surge that we saw was the digital surge in streaming. Look at where that's gone from 19, 20, 21% through the middle of last year to 26, 29, 30% now at the end of April in 2015. So we're already at 30% of the business right now. If that trend continues, where does that end up at the end of the year? It doesn't take a math genius, and I'm certainly not one, to extend that trend line and go, are we going to be 40% streaming by the end of the year? Now, yes, the physical side of the business is going to kick in a little bit at the end of the year and bring that back, but that streaming piece of the business is not just big now, but it's been growing, and it's been growing pretty steadily. This would make a lot more sense if, there we go. If the streaming volume has really grown pretty significantly, and you look at where we got to at the end of the year, and yeah, around the holidays, streaming tends to, the growth tends to flatten out a little bit around the holidays. But what we're looking at here is total streams in blue. The audio streams are down at the bottom in orange, and the video streams are in purple in the middle there. And what we've got is 94% growth in streaming volume just over the 40 weeks since we've been tracking it. So it's not like streaming is this slow, steady, oh, it's up 10% again year over year or anything like that. This thing is big and getting bigger, and the rate of acceleration is actually increasing. You can see the slopes of those lines going up pretty steadily and pretty dramatically once we get to 2015. So how do we listen to music? She passed away like 2 days ago. 101 years old. Can you believe that? The rapping granny from The Wedding Singer. You guys remember that, right? She did Rapper's Delight. Yeah, she passed away a couple days ago. But the way we listen to music and how it varies by age and by the type of consumer is really marked. And the way that we look at this again with millennials and teens and what they're listening to, what we've got here is all the different genres of music that people are listening to. And they're ranked basically top to bottom by total listeners and what percentage of people are saying, yes, I'm listening to that kind of music. And as you can see, classic rock is really the leader at 78% of people saying, yep, I listen to classic rock. But if you break that down into teens and millennials, classic rock starts to lose a lot of its weight. And it starts to come back in these cells that are down here in the green. The EDM, the alternative, the hip hop, the rap, much, much, much higher for teens and millennials. And what we see is that same type of thing switches over to where they are listening. So if they're going in and listening to a lot of streaming, you know what? Streaming over-indexes pretty heavily on rap and hip-hop. So it's not just that consumer, it's the type of music that they're listening to, and it's where they're listening to it. As we said, R&B, hip-hop, definitely, that consumer definitely favors streaming much more so than buying lately. We've taken the percentage of song sales and the percentage of streams done by genre. And what happens here is we see that, that pop fan, yeah, about 25%, 26% of sales and of streams are in pop. So it kind of performs the same way with streaming as it does with selling songs. But let's get into R&B hip hop and that format over here. And obviously, very near and dear to our hearts here, Drake, for example. Drake is a great example that does just unbelievable numbers on streaming. I mean, these numbers are the share of consumption that is coming from streaming on an artist like Drake is very, very high compared to other artists. So that R&B hip hop, you know, when you get a new Drake record and everybody wants to go out and stream it, that number is a much, much higher number for streaming than it is for sales. Only 12% of the song sales are coming from R&B hip hop, but 20% of the streams are coming from R&B hip hop. So that consumer, again, continues to be a much more streaming-driven consumer. You see just the opposite in country. That country consumer is still buying a lot of things. They're still very physically album-driven for that country consumer, but when they are going digital, they're buying a lot more songs than they are actually doing streaming. The other thing that we've broken down here is the difference between audio streaming and video streaming. Where are people going in and saying, I want to listen to that song, and where are people going in and saying, I want to see that goofy guy do that dance again? And it's kind of coming down to the types of consumers that like pop and R&B hip hop are much more video driven than they are audio driven, where that rock consumer, and you can see how dramatic that line is, 35% of audio streams are coming from the rock genre, and less than 25% are coming in video. So that rock consumer is still going in and saying, I want to hear the song. I don't really need to see that dude dressed up in leather that's like 70 years old now, doing whatever he's doing on stage, breaking a hip or doing whatever. I wanted to listen to the song because I love the song, but I don't need to go in and watch the video. That would just be painful for me. The top stream songs. Here are the top stream songs so far, year to date. Mark Ronson, runaway winner right now. Top audio stream, top video stream, top song sale, no question. I mean, if you haven't streamed or bought or listened to Uptown Funk, you might be that one person. But you can see where some of the other ones are. And usually you see really great correlation across audio rank, video rank, and sales. But it's not always the case. You do get cases like Meghan Trainor, All About That Bass. Everybody wants to go watch that video. And that does kind of come down to who's listening to the song, the demographic of it, and how they index towards YouTube and Vevo. But Meghan Trainor is only the 46th highest ranked audio stream song this year, but it's 8th overall. It's the 7th ranked video stream song. So everybody wants to go in and watch Meghan Trainor. Everybody wants to go in and hear that song on YouTube and Vevo, not necessarily everybody going into their favorite audio streaming service and listening to it. I think it's really interesting to see here these are the top on-demand stream songs, and I'll find a nice prize for somebody that can come up with the answer to this question. If you look at the video ranks, you have got the top, out of the top 11 video ranks, 10 of them are in the top, of the top 11, that makes up the top 10. There's one missing there. There's number 9. The number 9 video this year is not in the top 10 of overall consumption. Does anybody know what the number 9 video of this year, 2015, if I need to remind you, is this year? Anybody? There's a good prize, and it's not Dinner With Me. That's not a good prize. Nothing? How about Gangnam Style? Everybody watch that video lately? You were gonna say that, weren't you? You should have. I'm still not giving you a prize. It's Gangnam Style. So again, this is crazy. Again, let me remind you, it's 2015. The fact that Gangnam Style is still driving the 9th most video views from the video providers on streaming, I mean, look at how long the monetization has been for this song. For a song that really doesn't, sorry if anybody's a Psy fan in here, doesn't really have any audio value to it at all. Nobody's buying the song. Nobody's listening to it on audio streaming. I don't say, hey, I gotta pull up that Psy song because musically, just really hits me. That's not happening. Video-wise, oh my God, this guy's hilarious. I gotta watch him do that thing again, and he does that dance, and okay, that's happening a lot, and it scares me a little bit. There's a big difference between the audio streams and the video streams, however. This is the audio stream side of the business, and again, you see a lot of correlation at the top, but when you get to some of these artists, Weeknd, Flo Rida, Pitbull, and Neo, these songs are not nearly consumed as much on video as they are on audio so far this year. So on the audio side, there's a little bit more of a difference, where the video has a very, very high correlation to the top 10. The audio is really kind of all over the place. There are a lot of songs that are very popular in audio formats that aren't as popular on video formats. When do we stream our music? It's kind of interesting, and this will change. I'm sure Global Street Day is going to come up as a topic sometime this week, probably. But the way that we listen to streaming is very different. The audio streaming side of the business tends to spike Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Well, Tuesday just happens to be release day, and that's when all the records come out, and everybody wants to listen to the records when they come out on Tuesday. On the video side of the business, that album release period is not quite as critical. It's, I want to go watch that video, not I'm going to go listen to every single song on the album on video, but much more so I want to go in and watch the hits on video. So the weekend is the peak time for streaming on video, whereas the week tends to be the time that people stream their audio. So how do we define success? We're changing the way that we define success. I think the advent of streaming and the popularity of streaming has forced us to change the way that we measure success. New types of consumption means we have to have new ways to measure success. You can see when what we've done in the US as of the end of last year is we've gone to an all-in consumption chart for the official top 200 chart. Billboard has partnered with us, and we had a lot of conversations on how we wanted to do this. And the way that we measure success for the top 200 has changed in the US. Well, it's going to change in Canada too. We've got this type of capability to measure all of these things. And you can see the types of records that come out in the top 200 and where they rank from an album sales rank and where they would rank from a total consumption rank. You get an artist like Yoan, and obviously that's a very album-driven consumer there. 99% of the total consumption coming from album purchases. Yeah, when you win, when you're the best on a TV show on something like that, that's a pretty album-driven consumer. Kendrick Lamar, pretty surprisingly, actually does very well relatively on streaming, but just sold a ton of albums. 85% of the consumption that week was coming from albums on Kendrick Lamar. He was number 9 on consumption and number 5 on albums that week. The ones that I think are really interesting is down at the bottom, the songs and stream-driven consumers and artists, where you look at where Maroon 5 was on the album chart. It was the number 13 album, so it wasn't a top 10 album, but you look at the amount of volume that's coming from song sales and from streams, and that actually makes Maroon 5 the 7th most consumed album of the week last week. So Maroon 5 is a type of artist that benefits there because of the popularity of the song. We talked about Mark Ronson a little bit and just how popular Uptown Funk is. It's only the 93rd best-selling album, but it is the 20th most consumed album when you take all the songs from it, all the streams from it, and add those all in together. So it really makes a dramatic difference to those albums that have these very, very heavily consumed songs, heavily consumed streaming, songs or collections of songs. Ariana Grande, another great example. Drake, another great example. This is not even the newest Drake. This is the catalog Drake album right now, or this is about 18 months old, I think. The 263rd best-selling album, but when you look at all the consumption that's coming from the Drake album, 28% coming from songs, 25% coming from streams, that catapults that album right back into the top 200. So now you have a better reflection of how much consumption is going on around albums and what the true top 200 would be. You can expect to see something like this become the official chart, hopefully sometime this year. All right, skipped a slide. Spending, knowing the consumer, measuring their behavior, and where is the money coming from? And that's the biggest question, I think, of all, is where is the money? I heard Ted talking a little bit more about when is this going to finally start to offset itself and we're going to start making more revenue here. Well, the revenue is actually up a little bit over our last survey. This $115 on average that the Canadian music fan spends per year is a little bit up. I think it was about $112 and change a couple years back. So we are actually spending a little bit more money on music. We're just changing where we're spending it. And what we've done here is we've broken out, again, the great thing of surveys like this is the ability to, and Russ will probably echo this as well, is the ability to sort of cross-tab these things against each other. Hey, let's take this group of individuals and measure it in how they do this. Or let's take all the individuals that do this and measure it against the different types of demographics that they bring. In something like this, you can look and you go, the eye is instantly drawn to the right-hand side of this, the music festival attendees, and the fact that they're spending over twice as much per year than the average music consumer. How valuable is that festival attendee? And it's not just that they're spending more because they're buying a bunch of really expensive tickets. Yeah, their expensive tickets are part of that, but they're spending more on everything else. The other thing that I think is interesting is the Francophone consumer here. As you can see, it's much less than the average consumer, but when it comes to things like CDs, that consumer is still a very album-driven consumer, and they spend more on CDs than the rest of the consumers do. So there are parts of each of these ecosystems that I think are very important and need to be capitalized on, but the first thing you have to do is sort of know that and understand it and know where your consumer is.
You're taking a breath. Can I ask you
I
a
am
question?
taking one breath, yes.
Can I ask you a question?
You may.
In some of your early stuff, and I don't mean to interrupt the flow, but we'll get through the whole
That's
thing.
okay. I got it.
You showed an uptick in album sales.
Yes.
Have you looked at
Good news,
how
right?
you correlate the uptick in album sales to the effect of streaming services over a la carte track services? Is there a correlation there that now that I can hear the whole album on a Spotify, I'm going to possibly buy that album?
The album numbers there are just pure sales albums. So yes, there is definitely, and we asked consumers that in the survey here as well. It's not going to be in a slide here, but there is a thing for that says what percentage of consumers are going into streaming services as a discovery and pre-purchase methodology, and that number is high. So I think you're dead on of where you are. Is that there is
back to your regularly scheduled show.
That is a lot. Back to my regular scheduled. What did Kenny G do? He does circular breathing. That's what I'm practicing here. When you breathe in through the saxophone and out through your nose. I can't figure that out yet, but I'm going to try it with this microphone. So here's the last. How do you know? How do you learn about the Canadian fans' consumer behavior? What do you learn about them? There's a whole lot of facts and stats, and I just picked out some of the ones that I thought were really interesting. And like I said, this is fresh off the press, so you're going to see a bunch of stuff come out in the press, and the coverage of it will be great. And I'm sure some other things will come out. But I think a really interesting one is Canadian consumers say they'd be willing to pay about $6 a month for unlimited streaming service with no commercials, and $8 for high definition audio service with no commercials. Unfortunately, I don't think there's a service out there that's charging that quite yet, but it does show that there is an appetite towards spending on streaming, which is a little bit different maybe than what we're seeing in some other territories where they say, you know what, ad-supported works just fine for me, I'm never going to pay for it. So the Calgary Stampede, the most well-known music festival, but when you ask people what festival would you like to go to, that's when some other things come up. Squamish Valley comes up, Prairie Jam comes up, Shambhala comes up. The highest share of respondents who want to attend those festivals. Sponsoring live concerts, really, really important for brands, and it's a really great way to reach those high-value consumers. That is one of the most well-received activations by brands is them sponsoring tours or sponsoring festivals. And despite lower spending overall in music, we touched on this a little bit, the Francophone consumer does outspend the average consumer on CDs, and it accounts for 25% of their total music spend, which is much higher than what we see on some of the other demographics. So that being said, I think, yes, there we go. We are Canadian music, and that's how we learn about who we are and what Canadian music fans look like. I even put some French up there. I'm not even going to try it, but I wanted to make sure that I'm touching everybody here. So who is the Canadian music fan? I mean, you know who we are. We're the Cinnamon Girls, and we're the Skater Boys, and we're the hot childs in the city, and everywhere we go, our kids want to rock. And it's Alanis might say that we're ironic, and Jan Arden might tell us we're insensitive, and even Nelly Furtado says we're promiscuous, and I've actually been to this conference before, and I know she's right about that sometimes. But we're going to take some advice from some of our greatest artists. We're going to fight the good fight like Triumph tells us to. We're going to never surrender like Corey Hart tells us to. We're going to take care of business like BTO tells us to. And if we do all of those things, we are going to be, as Headley very profoundly puts, we are going to be invincible. So thank you.
A man who needs no introduction, but I will introduce him. Again, these are two of the brightest minds. I always feel humbled when I share a stage with them.
So I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about most of what we do is in the United States. So some of the things that I'm going to show you are US based, but I think especially based upon what David just showed you, the learning is essentially the same. Talk is titled 8 Shades of Grey. Ted was really excited. He thought I was going to teach him 8 new positions that he could use while listening to Barry White music. When I talk about gray, what's interesting, and David and I were talking about this in the green room before, is we have a lot of conversations with the media. There's a lot of industry conversations about all of these issues that are going on. And I just happened to pick, about 8 of them. We're talking a lot about exclusives. We're talking about windowing. We're talking about getting people to pay and freemium and so on. And I actually think that there's a little bit of a misunderstanding between where the industry is at, certainly where the media is at, and where the consumer is at. So I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about these topics and just see if we can try to get our beliefs in alignment with where the consumers are. Now, there's been a lot of people quoted about this. We've heard from Lucian Grange and Lily Allen and Tim Westergren and BMI and ASCAP on things like premium and exclusives and so on. I actually like this. This is from Chris Matusek from CNET. And what he says is, at the end of the day, perhaps the biggest rogues and thieves, though, are us. Give us something right now, and we'll take it. Give us something for free, we'll take that too. But give us something for free right now, and we'll think that life just couldn't be any better. And I think to some extent, that's really the state of the consumer these days. So what I want to do is spend a couple of minutes talking about, how does this all align? How are some of the things, the industry actions that are being discussed, how does that align with what the consumer thinks about? And I think it's worthwhile, at least in the US, to start out with, David kind of touched on this a little bit about ad-supported services, about how many people are actually streaming these days. In the United States, there are 120 million free streamers. And by free streamers, they could be using Spotify, they could be using Pandora. As David pointed out, YouTube and Vivo are probably the largest sources of streaming. So we're including all of those in there. If you ask people, and we do this all of the time, what would motivate you to pay for streaming, what happens is you get about 50 million who say absolutely nothing. We give them lists upon lists of, would it be exclusives, would it be free trials, would it be lower prices, and they keep saying absolutely nothing would make me pay. And what's really interesting about those people is when you find out what would you do if all of this went away, a lot of them would just be happy going back to AM and FM, surprisingly. So they're not necessarily going to piracy. They're certainly not going to whip out their credit card. They'll just go back to listening to the radio in the car. That leaves us with about 70 million people in the US who say that they might pay. I don't believe these numbers. And David and I both do a lot of price testing. I don't believe when people tell us, yeah, I'd be willing to pay $1 less. I don't believe them either. I think that you have to have a predisposition to streaming, and whether we charge $4 or $10 or $20, if you're not predisposed, if you don't buy into the whole thing, the answer for you is probably going to be zero. But so let's take that 70 million number and maybe cut it in half and say, well, perhaps there's 35 million people in the US who'd be willing to pay for streaming. That's pretty good because right now the number is somewhere around 10. So in theory, we should be able to multiply the number of paid streamers, paid subscribers, by a factor of 3 or 4. So the industry is talking about a lot of ways. How do we accomplish that, right? One of the ways that's being spoken about is something that I call gating, right? And what gating means is my music is never going to appear on a free service. You're going to have to pay to see my video, to listen to my track, to listen to my album. And what's really interesting is if you say, well, okay, if this was never available on a free service, would you pay? And only about 11% of people say that they would. That's among all free streamers. Among the people who are inclined to pay, that's 70 million, it's about 28%. So I think part of this discussion is the glass half full or the glass half empty? 28%, thank you very much. 28% is a pretty low number. But then again, if you say, well, wow, we could get a third of that 70 million to start paying, that's not bad considering where payment is today. So I think you have to put everything in perspective. If you're very positive about things, you say, these numbers aren't really big, but they represent tens of millions of people. If you're negative, you say, well, most people aren't going to be impacted at all by something like gating, right? So this whole thing about exclusives, and Tidal has really blown that up, only 9% of people said that having exclusives would really motivate them to pay. So after all that we've been through the past few months, especially in the United States, talking about Tidal, talking about Jay-Z, talking about Beyonce, 90% of people say that would have absolutely no impact on whether or not I would start paying for a service. It gets a little bit higher among people who are inclined to pay. It gets a little bit higher among people who are younger. But I think we have to be really careful about talking about some of these mechanisms that all of a sudden we're going to make these changes to the freemium model or to the streaming environment, and tens of millions of people are going to start automatically paying. The data just doesn't support that. And if you take a look at Windows, right, Windows as opposed to gating it's going to be available on the paid service now, maybe a few weeks down the road. It'll be available on free services. You know, that number is only 6%. So again, you keep seeing this theme over and over again that some of the mechanisms that we're talking about to try to move people off of freemium onto paid platforms don't seem to be resonating as much with consumers as the industry would necessarily like.
So Russ, let me interrupt you. When you talk about windowing and when you talk about exclusives, does this just basically cause people to go look for it somewhere else? I mean, basically, it used to be if there was a radio station had something exclusively, there was nothing you could do about it. They had it. Now there's my son can find it for me in a minute.
I think that it depends upon who. For somebody like your son, he can find it in a minute, and I'll talk a little bit about piracy. I actually think for a lot of people, they just don't care. There's so much content, and David probably has looked at this in terms of how much how much new is being listened to on these services versus how much catalog versus how much deep catalog. There's just so much to listen to on these services that if I don't have Jay-Z's B-sides, I don't give a crap. I'll go listen to REM or Green Day or whatever else I like.
Well, use the Taylor Swift situation with Spotify as an example. Did it help her, hurt her, or will we ever know what the effect of holding back from Spotify? I mean, I know she had a huge record. Here, David.
Yeah. We actually did ask consumers that last year in the US on our 360 survey. And we asked them, if your favorite artist stuff isn't available on a streaming service, what do you do? And you do get a very big percentage that say, I'm just going to move on to something else, as Russ said. They're also going to find ways to get it. The Taylor Swift is a great example. Hey, I'm Taylor Swift. This thing isn't working for me. I'm pulling all my music off of audio streaming services. You wouldn't believe the spike we saw in YouTube streams the next week. I mean, it was basically like everybody who was going to Spotify literally said, can't get it there? That's fine. I'll go over here and get it.
The lines, I've seen David's chart. The lines flipped. I mean, it went from Spotify like this to YouTube. Spotify went down, YouTube went up. They just flipped. But I think we also have to be careful that there's a lot of people who basically are, apathetic. As long as I have something to fill those 20 listening hours, I'm fine. I think the one thing is, when we talk about freemium, is it looks like we would have to completely degrade the freemium experience. With gating, with windowing, perhaps exclusives. I mean, you have to start making the freemium experience really bad for people to start, then you get about 23% say that they might be willing to pay, which again, it's not a big number, but it's a lot of people. So, just in summary, I think we've got to go back to the idea of what is it that makes people pay for streaming. I don't think it's windows and gating and exclusive. I think there's just this subscription ethos that I like the idea of having a paid subscription. I like the access that it provides to me. I like the discovery experience. I like the idea that I can use it anywhere with all the devices. These are the same people, and by the way, if you find me a paid music subscriber, I guarantee you they are 50% more likely to be using Netflix. They're much more likely to be using Amazon Prime. So we have to understand that there is a particular type of person who's motivated by what subscription brings. And some of the things that are music related may not be quite as effective as the industry hopes. What is, if you add people who are free streamers, two things that they say they'd like is, one is a free trial, the other is lower prices. I believe the free trial, and forgive me, David, I don't believe lower prices, right? Because I don't think that, we've done some testing in the past. I don't think if you don't buy into the whole proposition of paying for a subscription, again, I don't think it matters whether it's $3.99 or $9.99 or $19.99. So here's a statement, I'll let you read it. There's a whole generation of people who I work with, college-age people that believe it's free and it's always been free. There needs to be a re-education because if you don't, then we can't make more, right? Got to be talking about music, don't we? In fact, we're talking about, anybody want to guess? We're talking about porn. So if you people don't start paying for your porn, there's not going to be any more porn. The reason that I bring this up is really not to talk about adult content.
Oh, please do.
Although we could schedule that session. What I do want to talk about is remind everybody that there are actually an increasing number of people. We thought the piracy problem was over with LimeWire. There are an increasing number of people who are getting music through free sources. So let me tell you what the numbers mean. 29 million people last year downloaded free songs from a mobile app. 20 million still were downloading from peer-to-peer, and about 18 million are stream ripping. And what worries me about mobile apps is it's not entirely clear. I went to look last week. I was looking for where Tidal was in the iTunes store, right? And I swear to God, I had to get past the Jewish radio channel and the Serbian music service came before Tidal. But what's really interesting is that things like Musify, there were all of these apps in the iTunes store that really aren't legitimate music apps that the average person wouldn't know. We used to know that we were doing bad things. Nowadays, it's kind of harder. It is much more gray. And that's why I think you start to see seeing the growth in these numbers, because as more of us are using music on our devices, as more of us are going to the app stores, we're finding these things, and it's not clear what they are. These are not uniques, and they do, there is a lot of overlap between them. We talk a lot about sound quality. That's come up with Neil Young, with Tidal, and I just want to make the point that when we take a look at people who are mobile music listeners, about half of them are listening through their headphones or their earbuds. And you know what most of those headphones, if you go to a gym and watch people on the treadmill, a lot of them are, they're not listening to high-end, they're not using high-end headphones. About 50% say having the highest sound quality is really important to me. And almost 40% say I would actually pay more for the sound quality. But here's the conundrum. The conundrum is they're sitting on those treadmills or running on those treadmills with those white earbuds, and only 29% of them say that the quality of the music isn't good enough. So people want the highest level of sound quality, but the challenge is they think that they've already got it. So I think that we need to do more education in terms of what does sound quality mean, what is the value of that, and have more people experience it, or else nobody is going to be paying an extra $10 for a service like Tidal to get higher sound quality. Tidal will be the exception to that.
Well, let me ask you that. Do most people know how good it can sound? Because when I play people a Pono, or when I play music on Tidal for somebody, they go, I had no idea. And the best example is Enter Sandman by Metallica. I never liked Metallica. I've been listening to that album over and over again because, I don't know, don't ask me why,
Right.
but it sounds so crisp, so clear, so clean that I never heard it before like that. And do people know the difference? And when Brian was up here talking about digital photography, it was quick, it was easy, you didn't have to put a roll of film in, but it sucked. Now digital photography, I do believe, exceeds what we were ever able to do with film. When music gets to that quality and people realize it, am I just the, I mean, you said I'm the one guy, so I jumped in. Am I the one guy that really cares how good it sounds?
I think you're in the minority. You're very well educated about these things. I've been to your home, so I've seen, you know, I've seen the gear that you've got, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So
Any of you?
You know, but I think that for the vast majority of people that, you know, it's the same, we fought the same battle with DVD and Blu-ray, right? Blu-ray is going to be the next 7-to-1 sound. It's going to be, you know, XP, I forget what the number is. And you know what happened is most people said, man, DVD is pretty darn good. And that, you know, that's why Blu-ray didn't take off as quickly as it did. So, you know, I think we just have to be careful again. I'm not saying that sound quality isn't important. I'm thinking we have to be careful about how we position it to the consumer. You know, one thing that sort of interests me, and I think in this world of streaming, especially if you want to get people to pay, is how do we replicate some of the experience that we had in the world of physical? And what's interesting to me is, despite what folks like Bob Lefsetz says, you know, nobody needs to own anything or wants to own anything, is what's actually interesting is about 60% of CD or digital download buyers say that it's important to own the CD or digital file. But 40% of streamers would agree with them. Now, I'm not saying in a world of Instagram, Snapchat, you know, Periscope, that we're still going to walk around with milk crates full of music. But what I am saying is there was something about that ownership experience that made people want to pay for it, or made them willing to pay for it. I think vinyl's a really great example of that. We need to think, whether it's about playlists, for example, how do you get that ownership feeling in a streaming world so that people want to not only sign up for it, but they want to continue paying for it month after month. And again, I'm so sorry, David, because I apologize. But if I see anything more on millennials, when I do this in the US, it'll be a baseball bat. Up here, I figured I'd use a hockey stick. We have to understand who our consumer is. And, you know, I love millennials. I am the father of 2 of them. But I think we just have to understand who is the music consumer. David spent a lot of time with some really terrific data helping you understand who they are, what they do, what devices they're using. But let's understand something else, that if you take a look at people who are musically engaged, they buy, they stream, they share, they buy those concert tickets, they buy merch. 40% of them are still baby boomers. This is the Pew definition of different demographic cohorts. So I just want to emphasize that as much as we talk as an industry about teens and millennials, and for all the right reasons, we can't forget practically half the customers are, you know, over the age of 45 or over the age of 50. And I think for too many years they've been ignored. If you take a look at their contribution to buying stuff, it's 40% of digital tracks and CDs are bought by boomers. But more interestingly, if I showed you share of time spent listening, and you looked at this chart, especially after what David showed you, you would say to me, wow, this looks like the distribution of listening for Sirius. It could even look at like the distribution of listening for AM/FM, music on AM/FM radio. In fact, it's the distribution of listening for all of these services combined. So again, when we think about, whether it's thinking about marketing tactics or who our customer target is, realize that it's just not millennials, it's just not teenagers, that it's also their moms and occasionally their grandmoms. And I just want to close this out by talking a little bit about Artist Affinity. I was looking at some data about purchase intent, and it really shocked me. And it came up, I came up with this idea of how do we expect somebody to pay $100 for a subscription on the strength of an artist, right? Think about the Tidal model again, not to beat on them, but all of those artists sitting up there on a podium when most people aren't willing to pay 99 cents for one of their downloads. And we ask this question all the time. We've been asking it for years, but I never really paid attention. We asked them if this artist released something new, some new music, and this is an artist that you like them a lot, you like them a little, would you buy it? And only about a third, let's just average these out. If you take Lady Gaga, it's about 30% said that they would buy her music. Only about a third said that they actually would. And then I said, well, people can like them, but maybe I'm not a really big fan of them. The numbers don't change. If I overlay, here's somebody who's a huge fan of the artist, Lady Gaga's 23%, Beyonce's 30%. Now, look, if Beyonce could really get 30% of her fans to buy something, she'd be an even wealthier young lady, all right? So again, these 30% isn't necessarily bad, but it starts to make me think, what about the 70% of people who like the artist, who say that they're really a big fan, but they aren't buying something? And it raises the question to me of, with all that we're doing in terms of social media, the way that we've changed marketing, are we being as effective as marketers in terms of influencing consumers to buy the music? And whether that's buying the music through a subscription or through a download doesn't really matter to me. And by the way, I figured somebody would say, well, they're not buying it because they're all streaming it. So I cut the data by streaming. Streaming actually doesn't really play a role. People who are streaming these artists, people aren't streaming these artists, only about a third of them say that they would buy something. And again, if you're not inclined to buy their CD or their download, I don't know why you're going to be inclined to spend $9.99 a month to get their exclusive on any streaming service. So just to kind of wrap this up and give Ted back a few minutes, we're talking about a lot of issues in the industry right now, and those issues, as I said, are being spoken about by senior management at the labels, by the collecting societies, by artists, by the technology companies, and I just think that we need to have everybody aligned in terms of what is it that the consumer actually wants and feels and is motivated by.
Round of applause for Russ and for David here. This is amazing. So, first of all, I want to ask the audience a question. How many of you, taking live out of it, talking about streaming or purchasing either physical or digital music, have spent money to buy music? Yeah, I can see it now. Okay. How many of you are spending over $50 a year purchasing music? It's very impressive. Okay, short story. I only have 5 minutes, but it wouldn't be me if I didn't have a story. So 2 years ago, I spoke at NYU at the Clive Davis School of Recorded Music. And it was a room full of MBA students. It was sort of Clive Davis School and the Tisch MBA School. And they asked me to give a 30-minute history of the history of 30 minutes of the history of digital music. I do the whole thing. And at the end of it, I said, this is really great. I've got all you really bright minds here in the room. I've just been hired by this guy who is, he's eccentric. This guy's name is Hans Pandya. He was going to buy Pirate Bay 2 years ago and take Pirate Bay legal. And so I said, how many of you, here's the idea of the model. It's $5 a month, but you have to sign up for a year. So you're going to make a $60 commitment. How many of you would sign up for unlimited downloads of unprotected, no DRM, it's not streaming. You can download all the music in the world basically for a $60 commitment. There's 30 students in the room. 2 hands go up. How many of you would do it for $4 a month? Another hand goes up. $1 a month for all the music ever created in the history of the world. 2 more hands go up. 5 cents a month, you little sons of bitches, for all the music in the world. Another 3 or 4. So never more than half the room at a nickel. These are MBA music students. Each one of them came up to me afterwards giving me their little shitty MBA business school business card going, can you get me a job in the music business? What music business, you little pricks? I mean, I turned into Mr. Wilson from Dennis the Menace. I was so, like, literally, you're kidding me, 5 cents a month, and they were like, nah, we don't pay for music. So what I'm trying to understand is, what is the resistance, and I'm turning to David, of this disconnect between the passion for music, the love of music, the connection, the emotional connection, and this mindset, even with people who want to be in the music business, that music isn't worth paying for. So I throw it out to either of you.
Go ahead.
You know, look, I think first of all, there are a lot of really superb free options. So let's not just.
Why does it have to be free?
Well, but the fact is that there are, okay, and you know, so number one, and if these options didn't exist, we'd be having this conversation about AM/FM radio, right? So,
Let me frame it though. When I was a kid, when I grew up, you heard the Rolling Stones on the radio, and then you heard it again a few hours later, and then you heard it again. Put that rep sign. We're okay. We got 2 more. We've got 2 minutes.
But
I'm
going to answer. Okay. I'm going to answer your question.
What happened was radio created demand that drove me to go to Future Shop or drove me to go to Tower Records to buy. Now digital satiates that demand.
Right.
But why not? Why can't you pay for that?
But let me give you one, and
I will not say another word the rest of this here.
I don't want to make this entirely about free, but I do think one component is take a look at the analog for video. I came to Breaking Bad late. I couldn't get it all on my paid on demand through my cable system. So I had to go to iTunes and pay $35 for the if I wanted to watch the second season. Well, I'm not pirating things, right? And the fact is that most people aren't. I'm not pirating things, so I had to pay $35 to get that season on iTunes. And then a little later on, when I had to pay, you know, my $8 a month when that came through the window on Netflix. So I do think the fact there is a good analog to the video business that, you know, we have a disc scarcity. Is there an economist in the room? You know, that's part of the problem. Number one, and part of the problem is, I don't think that we've made, I mean, Tidal was a complete PR disaster. I don't think we've made a really good case to the consumer of why this is a so much better experience than, you know, other options. And Sirius did, by the way.
I'll say something really quick. I was here a few years ago, and someone showed a slide of a Canadian campaign, it might have been a U.S. campaign against piracy, and it was Mary J. Blige and Sheryl Crow. It was all these people, and somebody did a valuation of all the jewelry they were wearing, and they were wearing $4 or $5 million worth of jewelry and clothes in the aggregate, and it was really hard to make that cry for poverty. We have that same thing with Tidal right now. So, I mean, is there a light at the end of the tunnel? That's all I want to know. And we have 3 seconds.
Yes.
Yes, I'll tell you where
But is that light a train?
No. I'll tell you where I think it is. I think it's in the car. I think at some point when all of these services are really well integrated in the car, you're going to pay General Motors or Fiat or BMW or somebody $20 a month for an entertainment thing, and then the money will get parsed out, and hopefully the artists will get compensated. People will pay for research.
Yeah, and that's the great thing about it is you've got an ecosystem here. I'm sorry, I'm going to be fast. You've got an ecosystem here that only works if it works for the smallest artist all the way up to the Apples and the Googles and the biggest corporations in the world. And when something breaks down in there, you're going to get cases like, you know what, this doesn't work for me, I'm pulling my music off of the service. But when you do get something that works, and of course that's going to happen with legislation and all kinds of things like that are going to happen this year, once that does work, you're right, it has to be, you have to look at the things like you're looking at, that we're looking at, of who are those consumers? Where are those consumers listening? Where do they have value for the music? And where do we get them there? And the car is a great place for it. It's where we spend most of our time listening. Yep. It's also where we are a captive audience, and we want to be able to have control of that. We love Sirius because it gives us more control. We love AM/FM because it gives us local. We love streaming because it's everything we want to hear. Yep. There are different reasons to love different things in the same place in the car.
Right. Sorry. We're done? We're done. Talk to you later.
Thanks, guys. David, Russ, brilliant. Brilliant.